actually understanding how profound money is and how much it impacts everybody was the one that took me from interested, I see how this thing would work, to this is going to change the world, and it's something I need to invest much more of my life energy in and continue to give to. The money side of things, how many things are mutated by our money being inferior, how much time and life from people around the world is getting stolen via inflation from our governments, and how that energy is just taken from like the poorest of the people that are most disproportionately impacted by that. And it just breaks my heart, to be honest with you. And it's so frustrating that it's such a challenging thing to see.
All right, Michael Sullivan, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks. I saw you as a guest on another podcast, and I thought, man, I have to talk to this guy. I love that you're writing a Bitcoin novel that we will definitely talk about. But first, I wanted to start, of course, with the question: how did you discover Bitcoin, and how has your perspective on it changed over the years?
Oh man, I've had a handful of touch points to Bitcoin before getting interested in it. The first one was in 2015, back in a period of my life where I was very interested in self-exploration and psychedelics. Well, let's leave it at that. The second touch point was, again, with some coworkers in 2017, where they were very much speculating on Ethereum and other things, and had all sorts of different altcoins they were thinking were going to moon and make them $1 million. And I, yet again, didn't think it was interesting at all. I had no interest in the gambling side of things. And unfortunately, didn't get exposed much to Bitcoin. It continued on into 2019, where another wave of people hungry for price and speculation happened. And again, did not have anybody actually explain to me how profound changing the money could be. And yeah, pretty stubborn. Didn't really see it for what it was any of those times, even though I had used it previously. I always loved the technology of it. That part of it clicked for me relatively early. But I just didn't understand the monetary perspective of it. So the whole COVID era and seeing money printing and all of that stuff very quickly launched me down the rabbit hole, and been here ever since.
Nice. So how did Bitcoin come to you, through psychedelics, or did you buy psychedelics with Bitcoin?
The latter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd been way more interesting if it was the former.
Well, to be honest, psychedelics have helped me a lot to see the eventual like bigger picture of Bitcoin, like its place in the world. My own contribution attempt to it as well, but I think it's a common theme amongst people that adopt Bitcoin. Just in general, the personal development that you mentioned. I think once you start questioning your own beliefs or what you were taught, and you find answers in different places that, appeal way more to you than the things you thought were true, I think it's a small step to going with a psychedelic journey or something like that. But you had like different touch points, right? I think this is a common theme, right? Like people see it at different points. What were like misconceptions that you had on Bitcoin initially, or like how did they change for you?
So misconceptions were largely due towards the people I had interacted with that were purely using it for gambling purposes. So again, I kind of understood the technology side of it. I thought it was interesting as a way to just transact with people globally and all that. But I mean, it's almost like embarrassing to admit, but like I just used to think that this will never work, because man, like what if your computer that you have your Bitcoin on doesn't like crashes or something, you'll lose everything. And I was all like, maybe I'll have to I have some crafty kind of way to disconnect from the internet, just silly things, frankly. And then as we get into it, there's different things that resonate more and more with you. That misunderstanding made it so that when I finally understood how profound self-custody was, and so the cryptography behind how that all worked, being able to format your money essentially as words, it just completely transformed my life, frankly. There's a lot of different things that can click for a person to do it for them. But that one, particularly for me, changed my mind in an instant when I finally understood that. It doesn't matter if anything happens to any computers that I use, any different hardware devices that I use, the Bitcoin network, frankly, as long as you have access to those, you have access to your Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think one of my insights was also, okay, so this Bitcoin thing, it exists in this kind of like metaphysical way, right? It's not in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Right? First I thought, yeah, it's not on my device, but it's also not in the cloud. Like where is it, right? And I think once you get that, or for example, like see all the seed words on a page, right, that basically represent all the Bitcoin that will ever exist, something like that, I think for some people is like a profound thing where you think like, okay, so this is all words, where it's all like letters and numbers, right? And when I heard the example, I still really like this example. If you put a private key of a wallet in a safe in Switzerland, and you have the public key, you can basically send value to a safe in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And also, if you write down a private key on a piece of paper, then the metaphysical thing becomes physical and you can actually touch it, right? And you can transact it. If I give the paper to you, you have it and you can do with the private key whatever you want. Like that for me was part of the profoundness, where it like exists, but it doesn't, and you can pick when that is.
Yeah, and you can choose when to transform it between digital and physical if it suits you, when it suits you, or how, like the seed phrases were the first clicking point, but then multi-signature, like how much more that can protect you. Like other kind of physical commodities like gold, for example, you can't do anything like that at all. It's just an entire order of magnitude more superior to all of those things, arguably more.
Yeah, did you know there's a guy, Avi Boura? He wrote a book. I think it's called 24.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a fiction book, but he hid like seed words in the book. So if you read the book, you see like all the seed words are of course also general words, but in the book there's I don't know how much Bitcoin. I don't think it's 1 Bitcoin, but there's a portion of Bitcoin hidden in the book, in the words that he used. I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have one of the characters has 12 seed words in the book that are actually in them. Like,
oh, cool.
So that is a similar concept there. I just think it's such an interesting thing, and kind of demonstrates just like how uncensorable this is, like, and how unstoppable it is. Just pages of a story can hold money.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's actually a very good point, right? Like I think when you talk to people about Bitcoin, one of the last arguments or questions is the one that you mentioned, right? Like, what if there's an EMP or a nuke attack, or what if the Russians come or whatever?
Yeah.
Even then, Bitcoin would survive, with satellites in space, with miners and nodes, etc. But it's kind of like this end of the road argument against Bitcoin. But of course, when people say, Bitcoin is unstoppable, it always sounds very, I don't know, maybe sometimes it sounds a bit arrogant, right? But as you just alluded to, like, it's just words and it's letters and numbers, and you cannot ban words and letters and numbers. And I don't think a lot of people understand that yet.
No. And it's hard to understand even immediately. I thought I understood Bitcoin initially, and then you realize frequently, right? Like I still occasionally am having, I did not understand this as deeply as I once did. That's a perfect example of one of them.
Yeah. So along the way, what has really helped you change your mind? You just mentioned the COVID era and the money printing. Like, what was the biggest revelation to you that really made you dive deeper?
The technological parts initially were the big blocking point, but the actually understanding how profound money is and how much it impacts everybody was the one that took me from interested, I could see how this thing would work, to this is going to change the world, and it's something I need to invest much more of my life energy in and continue to give to. The money side of things, how many things are mutated by our money being inferior, how much time and life from people around the world is getting stolen via inflation from our governments, and how that energy is just taken from like the poorest of the people that are most disproportionately impacted by that. And it just breaks my heart, to be honest with you. And it's so frustrating that it's such a challenging thing to see.
Are you looking to save in Bitcoin for your retirement? Meet OnRamp, the leader in Bitcoin financial services. OnRamp has just launched the industry's first Bitcoin IRA with multi-institution custody. That means unparalleled support, transparency, and peace of mind for your retirement. With OnRamp, you can verify your assets directly on-chain and protect them with the support of 3 independent institutions, eliminating the risks of a single point of failure. Are you ready to take control of your Bitcoin retirement? Visit the link below or go to onrampbitcoin.com to learn more about OnRamp's Bitcoin IRA.
Part of the reason I wrote the book in the first place and have been working on it is because I think that a lot of the people that are in Bitcoin have a pretty good understanding of economics, logic, technology, and these things. But there's just this giant cohort of people that are much more emotional thinkers and function more in the emotional realm. So trying to find ways to convey how powerful this thing could be in a more emotional way rather than just logic and numbers, which are great for me. That's like, I love that stuff. I will never not love that stuff, but I don't think it's how everybody's going to be exposed to this thing and understand it.
So talking about the book, you are a writer, a novelist. Your first book, The Final Flaw, was published in 2022. Now the book that you're writing is called The Great American Bitcoin Novel. Could you share a bit about your journey as a writer and how you came to the decision to write a Bitcoin novel?
So part of it was always a bucket list item. I thought it'd be really fun to write something, but it turned into so much more than that initially. I've used the analogy that I think art is kind of like a flower, and your habits in your life is sort of like the soil that builds into that. If you really invest time into your habits and who you are and your relationships, I think there's just something that will spring up out of that and desire to flourish. That's kind of how the book came about for me, where I just felt like I had so much to give back to the world that I need to put myself into something and make something beautiful and give back to the world. That's how The Final Flaw came about. And it turned into a way to kind of work through some things too. The first book was about embracing your disadvantages and what makes you unique as a human, and not letting the stories of your disadvantages be a bad thing overrule you. I thought that was going to be it, to be frank with you. I put so much of my life into it. I loved the process, but I found this Bitcoin thing.
Yeah.
I just could not stop thinking about it. And I learned so many skills the first time around by writing the book. I just realized I had to continue this journey, and I felt like I had a story to tell in the Bitcoin novel. So we're a little over 2.5 years into that, multiple thousands of hours into it. And I'm so excited to share it, but it's just been a fun journey, and just grateful for it, honestly.
Awesome. What do you think draws people into, I mean, I'm doing the same thing with this podcast, right? Like what do you think draws people into honing their skill or applying their skills to, sharing more about Bitcoin with the world? Like what was that for you?
I want to say it comes from a place of love. It wasn't purely selfish. It's wanting to share more with the world, to act in a way that I feel like makes the world a better place. And it's hard to understand Bitcoin, know more about it, and not want to share it. I think we all kind of go through a phase of that in our journey where we won't shut up about it to anybody around us. I know I certainly did.
Yeah. It's funny. It's I had a discussion on one of the last episodes about how you will also probably agree that it's pretty altruistic, right? When you say it, like it feels altruistic, but people who are like critics will say like, yeah, of course you talk about Bitcoin because you have Bitcoin, right? But I totally understand what you are saying. It's just like, I would love for other people to see this. And I know, again, how ridiculous that sounds, right? When you say like, it sounds so cultish, and I love that. But I think it's just true. Like it's a genuine action of creativity, and it comes from a good place. And I think people do see that in content like that, especially a book, right?
It's very much a unique medium to try to convey information, where the first novel for me was a very similar process where I deeply felt some things that I was struggling to explain to people, but living through characters, following their stories, and being able to ride around in the brain of somebody is what makes novels so interesting. Movies and things can do similar things on screen, but to really like follow the words, you essentially enter the thoughts of a character. And doing that can change you as a person. You ride around in their ideas, you become them a little bit. And the first book was an attempt to do that in a way about embracing disadvantages. But this one, I think I'm going to achieve a similar thing, riding around in somebody who's escaping her home country with her Bitcoin in her brain, showing the evolution of how she learns to use it, knows more about it, and following some other characters that are using it for different purposes. It goes all over the place. I don't want to get too many spoilers about it, but that style of riding around in the character's head so you can feel how powerful this is rather than just read about it, I think is really unique.
Yeah, interesting. I wanted to ask you, so what is it about? Like, do you have a sneak peek?
I can give a little bit. It is definitely a little bit of a mystery story. There is a crime that happens in the beginning chapters where the main character finds 12 seed words carved into the bodies of two people that are speared over the bronze bowl on Wall Street. That bowl of Bowling Green, if you're familiar with that at all.
Yeah.
Financial related crime thing. I won't give too much about where it goes from that, just because I want to keep a little bit of mystery, but it follows multiple characters and it's all very deeply intertwined with Bitcoin and deeply intertwined with how unfair the current financial system is.
Awesome. And so, yeah, you mentioned this a bit, but you want to reach perhaps like more emotionally minded people, about Bitcoin, but more general, maybe what is the goal with writing this book?
There's a couple for sure. Like, I want it to be really enjoyable for Bitcoiners, right? Like I'm writing what I enjoy most. You kind of have to trust in your own taste when you're a novelist. Like I've been cultivating that for a while and I really didn't feel like what I desired was out there yet. So I'm making it. But as I worked on it more and thought about it more and realizing who I really wanted to give this message to was kind of like started with thinking about my wife a lot. Like I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this even that have a significant other or somebody they care about in their life that maybe listens to them about Bitcoin occasionally, has maybe doesn't understand it, wants to support you, but just like hasn't fully connected with the same logical arguments that attracted you to Bitcoin. That's the audience that I think this thing is best suited for. Conveying this information to somebody who's a little more emotionally minded. So I could think of this as like, this is the book that you could give your wife or loved one about Bitcoin if you want her to understand it a little bit more deeply. If you're not doing a particularly good job explaining it with all your financial arguments and logic and technology.
Yeah. It's funny. That's, I think, the pretty much like the male approach. Mm-hmm. Like, it's very practical. You give all the practical arguments for it. Oh man, that's so cool. I think, what I just love is that, it's so creative. And I think a book is a really hard format, right? Like it's not as fleeting as tweets or Instagram reels and stuff like that. Like it's really, it's really a finished thing. There are no like rough books or half written books, right? So yeah, how do you decide that it's finished? Like when is it good enough? How do you make sure that you like don't lose yourself in perfecting this thing until it probably never gets published?
You hit on by far my most challenging part is the perfectionist side of it. I definitely like to err on the side of making this thing as perfect as possible. The way that I've personally done it, and I think it varies a lot for different writers, but I have to get this thing into people's hands. In the more business world or software, which I do a lot of, is you want to very quickly get an MVP out there, iterate on it, learn from it, have people use the product and see where the energy and the money from the world indicates that you should continue going. That's hard to do with a novel, right? Because there's one of them, like you mentioned. It's out there, it's done pretty much. So I've been giving it to a lot of beta readers. I'm very fortunate. My wife is a just fantastic editor. She's really deeply knowledgeable about stories. So I'm very, very blessed in that sense. But getting as much feedback, seeing how people are viewing it, see if it matches up with the story that I'm actually trying to convey. I've done a lot of that. And again, everybody's process is different. There's some famous authors that just kind of do one pass and they're done with it. I've done 18 so far of like basically complete rewrites of this thing. I did 27 of my first novel, and I'm not somebody that's going to put out something that isn't completely up to the standards that I want it to be. It's very much a low time preference thing, right? I'm not trying to do this even to make money, to be frank with you. I'm doing it because I want to create something beautiful that'll last a while.
Awesome. I love, have you seen Rick Rubin on, I think it's...
You can stop there. I've seen a lot of Rick Rubin
Okay. No,
right.
But I think, like Rick Rubin talks a lot about this. Like you have to, like real creativity is just making something that is to your highest levels, basically, right? Like your bar of quality. And when you then release it into the world, it's up to the world to decide, if it's good enough or not. But that shouldn't really matter if it's good enough for you, right? Like if you can be honest about the work that you put in or how you crafted it, and you are very happy with it, then it doesn't really matter what comes after, right? And I love that idea because I think it makes you focus on just doing the one thing, but also if it's good enough for other people, then anything that will come from that, right? Any message, any compliment, any review, any invitation to speak somewhere or share or whatever, like that's all a gift, like an extra gift, right? So you just give yourself the gift of doing the best that you can do and finishing something that's up to par with your standards. And then everything else after that is just like an extra gift.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I alluded to this briefly earlier, but the first book for me was just a deeply transformative process because I was working through a lot of things personally and doing it regardless of how people felt about it or if I hadn't have gotten good feedback was really useful for me. I feel like I was able to close a chapter of my life and some things I had been thinking about for literal decades before writing that one.
Yeah, amazing.
We'll see if the same thing happens with Bitcoin. I can't imagine not thinking about it afterwards. But
well, I think just like, when I thought about starting I realized I wanted to contribute to Bitcoin after so many years. I was like, okay, now I really want to do something. What should I do? And then, the idea of a podcast popped up and I was like, another Bitcoin podcast. But later I realized, yes, of course, another Bitcoin podcast. And I see it now, right? Like I reach different people with this podcast than the people that inspired me reached, right? So it's kind of like you're getting all this knowledge from these other people and then you're sharing it and inviting new people that haven't been on Bitcoin podcast, right? Like I think like you're also kind of like new in that sense, right? I think that's the entire point of just not stopping to be creative, right? Just keep on being creative. And the same as with like a Bitcoin book. Of course you need another Bitcoin book, right? Because your book is going to appeal to other people that maybe haven't even looked at Bitcoin yet, right? And through how you describe it, they're going to be like, okay, this is perhaps an interesting thing and I should look into it, So I think the world is so huge that there's always place for like a creative outlet and there's always a way to reach people, especially in this context of Bitcoin, which, it's about a better money that it touches everyone, right? So we need to create all these different angles that will touch all these different peoples.
As long as I'm helping the Bitcoin network, it's helping everybody. It's this beautiful alignment of incentives.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So how, you're a fellow millennial, a bit younger, but how do you experience talking, you're very deep into it. I mean, you're writing a book about it. So how do you experience talking about Bitcoin with like our generational peers?
Oh, so uninterested. Like I mentioned, it's like you go through that phase where you're just never shutting up about it, trying to talk to everybody or talk about it with everybody. And kind of pulled back from that because there's just lack of interest. There's a lot of nihilism in the world with millennials, unfortunately. And it really breaks my heart. But that's the thing I struggle with most. I think having a deeply optimistic take, some people are just not going to be receptive to that idea, unfortunately. I've tried to change my strategies around a lot of different times when talking about it, but I don't know. I think a lot of Bitcoiners would relate where I haven't actually found one that is always working with them.
Yeah. So how does that make you feel, this nihilistic outlook? Like what do you think about it? I mean, I'm deeply optimistic about the future. I think I've not always been that optimistic, but Bitcoin definitely made me be the most optimistic I've ever been, honestly, about the future. And I also think people feel, that there's something going on and stuff keeps getting like more expensive, etc. But they don't really know where to look for the cause of it or how to understand it. And eventually it makes sense that it makes them nihilistic about the future, right? Like getting a house, starting a family, like all these things in the age that we are in, of course. Like, yeah, what do you think about that? How does it make you feel, or how do you think we can change that? Is there any hope in that?
I mean, I think Bitcoin is hope, right? I've always been a pretty inherently optimistic person. Maybe not always by nature, but the way you think forms who you are as a person. So if you just allow too many thoughts to enter your brain that are too negative, you cannot have as many good things happen to you just because you won't be looking for that out in the world. So I think that optimism is just a pragmatic decision in a lot of ways. Like it genuinely is a choice that you can make to have a better life and see better opportunistic patterns in the world. But even before Bitcoin, I was optimistic before, but just to know with such high certainty that I am going to become more and more wealthy, essentially. My family's savings is not going to be taken away from me. I have so much control over that. Is just it takes such a weight off of your shoulders, and I want that for everybody. And I think that can genuinely happen. One of the most interesting ideas in all Bitcoin to me is Jeff Booth's perspective on the natural deflationary state of the world via technology. And I really think that there is absolutely a path where that is going to be the world we live in. I think we're getting there. I think the work that we're doing is helping move us there. And that really makes me more optimistic. I'm hoping more and more people, as they get into Bitcoin, can see the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it's just really hard. You're trying to make sense of it with the things you've learned or have known that fit in your current paradigm. So it's also really hard. And of course, like the first action that people take is like resistance, right? I really try to switch to also like different things to say, but actually more like questions, right? Because if you talk about the money and say like, well, taxation is theft or whatever, right? Or inflation is theft, basically. Yeah, it's just harsh. It's too harsh, right? That's not a subtle approach to getting people on a certain train of thought or direction of thinking where they're like slowly challenging their own beliefs, basically.
That's the exact same reprehension that I've had when I was earlier mentioning how I really thought we were going to be entering a more inflationary period of the world, how many negative things I thought were going to happen if the current fiat system just continued to go on unencumbered. But again, didn't have particularly good success in doing that. But the small arguments of just getting 1% better, or just like getting any position, I think getting some skin in the game helps to begin to see how the incentives could align, begin to follow it, just like incrementally get people in rather than this like claiming that the world is going to end if they don't get into Bitcoin.
Quick question. If you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, where are you keeping your Bitcoin seed words? For me, there's only one way, and it's backing up my seed phrase with stamp seed. It's a single durable plate without any parts or materials. Stamp your words into solid titanium, which is fire resistant, water resistant, and built to last. Unlike etching or engraving, stamp seeds patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, making it easy for you to protect your generational wealth. Don't risk losing your seed phrase on paper. Get a stamp seed plate for unmatched protection. You can use code BRAM, that's BRAM, for 15% off at stampseed.com.
And once you, it's not just financial either that Bitcoin changes you, right? It very much teaches you this lesson to continue to question your beliefs, to see, like, I was wrong about Bitcoin. I only ended up getting it once I admitted to myself that I was wrong all my previous touch points with it. Once you do that about one thing, it becomes a lot easier to do that with other things and start to see that negative pattern of thinking in your life, which is one of the reasons I think that a lot of Bitcoiners get into a lot of other really positive things that improve their life continually.
Yeah. So how do you think storytelling around Bitcoin could be improved in general?
So to your point earlier, there's a lot of different perspectives, right? There is some of the best authors in the world, and I can't stand their storytelling. They're very much everybody's individual. So part of just the idea of having different perspectives out there is really good. But the thing that I think I would like to see, that is my taste and what I'm writing, is very captivating, right? We live in a day of TikTok reels, Instagram reels, short attention span. More and more people are being medicated with ADHD medication and focus, and there's a lack of that in the world. So being able to have a story that is just completely captivating, that brings a person through it, it's not like putting all these complex Bitcoin terms in your face, isn't saying the world is going to burn if we don't do this, but like you genuinely just want to get pulled along through this and see the world through the character's eyes. I think that is what the general Bitcoin storytelling could do a lot better, and I'm hoping to be a part of that.
Yeah. So what do you think is the main thing people need to unlearn before they can understand Bitcoin?
I had so much baggage from that inflation had to exist, that inflation was this good thing that had to happen, this 2% every year, a lie that I was told in my economics classes in college. That was a big one for me. It's in different realms, right? I see a lot of people that are completely oblivious to economics and Bitcoin in general that just think it's a Ponzi scheme, and that's their thing. But there's a lot of different perspectives, which is why I think it's so important for people like you to be giving different perspectives, right? Like there's all sorts of different views out there, and you never know how you're going to connect with somebody who needs to hear your message.
Yeah. Well, that's the entire point of the podcast, right? Just create all these different touch points, different stories, different views on, different elements of Bitcoin. And I think it's actually similar with books. Like I read a lot of books, about spirituality and personal development and stuff like that. And there's like this book called Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that's like my Bible, right? And so I have like a stack of books here that I just give out to new people that I know, and as a little gift. But what is in there, right? Very, very short summary is, like when you hear the voice in your head talk, when you're listening, who's talking, right? So you're not talking. So you're not the voice in your head. So you are not your thoughts. You don't have to identify with your thoughts. You are the observer, etc., etc. There's probably 1,000+ books that say the same thing.
Yeah.
But how Michael Singer wrote it is how it clicked for me, basically. And I read this book, I don't know, 10 times or something.
Mm-hmm.
And each time I find something new where I'm like, oh, interesting. It's just, over time I see new things. And I once gifted this to someone that said like, I know this book, but do you know this one? Like, this is really my thing. Mm-hmm. And then I said, oh, what is it? What is it about? Like, how do they explain it? And then he said almost the same thing as I just said. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because it's probably true that it works like that, right? And for me, it's been really beneficial to adopt a certain want to say model or framework for, mind, body, soul connection and all these things, that I then realized, like, oh, interesting. He thinks the same, but he came to it from a totally different way of explaining, right? It's totally different author. I never read that book. And I think it's the same with Bitcoin, probably the same with any subject, right? But I think something as complex as Bitcoin, where, everything you never knew about money is combined with everything you never knew about computers, and then physics, and then sociology, and then, all these things. It's especially true for this because, I found Bitcoin when I discovered it. I was like, yeah, Bitcoin, there should be a currency on the internet. Then that's Bitcoin, right? Like, that's just one pretty narrow angle with which you can look at Bitcoin, right? But people that come at it from, I don't know, the human rights angle or the unbanked angle or, something like that, eventually they will get to the, this is the digital currency through another route. So I think it's also just, again, just really cool you're writing a book, because you're probably going to reach people that, for who it's going to click, like how you wrote it down.
What you just said is something I've thought about so much. So I mentioned one way that I convey the concepts of Bitcoin in the book through this woman's story of escaping through her country, but there's so many different ways that people have come to these realizations. So by following multiple different characters, seeing them think about Bitcoin in different ways, like you're literally in their thoughts, and some of the characters are viewing it in very different ways than the other characters. Gives you more perspectives than just seeing, this is the way I think about Bitcoin, but hopefully just throwing many different perspectives at you while being housed in a captivating story. I'm hoping can catch a few more people.
Yeah, super fun. I think in general, just this entire creative process and trying to like unpack this concept of Bitcoin to see, what are all the touch points that we can create, I think is probably an exercise we're gonna work on for the next years. But for me, I think it's a fun thing. I think it's intellectually challenging, and it's rewarding when you get a message, from someone who said, how you talked about it, really made me change my mind. Like, yeah, that's just the best feeling ever, to be honest. Like, there's no, you don't need like a monetary reward for that or something. It's just like the feeling that you helped someone, I think is the best feeling that you can get.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we are recording this conversation one day before the US presidential elections. I have a little backlog, so it'll take some weeks for this to publish. But I wanted to ask you, why do you think Bitcoin has become somewhat of a topic in this race? I think bigger for Trump than for Harris, right? The fact that it's a topic, and in general, like the entire road that led up to this.
I think the biggest story here is just the fact that it is a topic at all, right? I very much, I live in America. I'm proud of that in a lot of ways, but I truly do identify as a Bitcoiner first. That's the thing I most deeply care about. That's 100% of the reason I will be voting in the way that I am for Trump. I'm also just very grateful for some of the work that people have been doing to speak to him about it, to get him to go to the Bitcoin conference, to talk to Bitcoiners, to say the things that he has said, regardless of if he actually follows through with it or not. I think just so much progress has been made there, and it has me really excited and optimistic for the world. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens here. It definitely feels like a strange time right now. There's a lot of tension in the world, right? And just seeing it in the people I interact with, that there's very different ways they're thinking about it. In the context of millennials, since that's your podcast, I'm seeing a lot more withdrawal right now. I think they're very exhausted politically with the world and are very frustrated with the options presented in front of them. I feel like Bitcoin is kind of giving me this different world. I feel so much more optimistic about the election coming up, and they're not my ideal candidates either, to be honest with you. But I have so much more optimism because at least the topic of Bitcoin is out there and being talked about.
And I think if Trump wins, I think that he will pull through with the all the Bitcoin ideas, just because the right people are in his ear. JD Vance is a Bitcoiner. Vivek is a Bitcoiner. Kennedy is a Bitcoiner. So And I think shout out to David Bailey of BTC Inc. I think he's the right person in Trump's ear in that sense. Just getting Bitcoin adopted by a big enough serious country, and I think the United States would be at the top of that list. That's the only goal, right? Because there's a serious country that adopts Bitcoin. All the serious countries have to adopt the Bitcoin. I think there's a global game theory behind that. So I'm also fascinated and excited that the word Bitcoin has actually been used in a presidential race and during this election. And I think for more people that should be a signal, like what this thing is, right? But I think then it's definitely a topic. Mm-hmm. So it's in that way it is unstoppable. You cannot deny this thing anymore. So whatever way Bitcoin finds its way into some sort of national treasury, I'm all for it because eventually I think you would agree. If we really fix the money, we fix the incentives, we fix the world. Whether people consciously adopt it or not doesn't really matter. Once you're playing the game of Bitcoin, you have to adopt its rules and you cannot cheat it. And that's the entire point.
Bitcoin's going to win either way. I know people get really excited about their candidate, but whichever way doesn't happen or whatever way you do think is going to happen, Bitcoin's still going to be spitting out blocks every 10 minutes.
It's crazy, yeah? I think that's a good insight as well. Like the whole Bitcoin doesn't care thing. It's just like, it's just a set of rules. And there's computers that decided, people with computers that decided to adopt these rules. And every 10 minutes, we check if the rules are still followed. If yes, then we continue. That's it. That's just basically it, right? So yeah, fun. You just said like you consider yourself to be a Bitcoiner before you are an American. Like, could you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, so again, the tagline in my Twitter profile is "I'm writing the great American Bitcoin novel." There's the ideals of the United States of America are built on freedom, sovereignty, liberty, and in a lot of ways, I don't think our country aptly lives up to those values as good as it used to. I still have a lot of faith, and I really think it can still be a fantastic place. But in many ways, just the free, open source, anybody can access, use it elements of Bitcoin more tightly identify with the ideals of the Constitution and what America was founded on, at least in spirit. I think I wish more Americans would see that. And I really do think that's one of the reasons why Bitcoin is again being talked about so much in America, because some of the things that at least I was taught growing up about how America functioned and the freedom here is just imbued into the soul of Bitcoin.
My next question isn't the concept of Bitcoin extremely American, right? But I think you just answered that. I think it is fascinating how Bitcoin aligns with these original American values, basically, and principles, right? And the fact that I just spent 10 days in the States, I think for a European coming over, I think the entire disparity between rich and poor is really in your face and very hard to process, to be honest. But so that is on one side. I think it's very negative. I don't think that is part of this original American idea, right? You have the total freedom, but eventually what I do feel when I'm in the States is like there still is some sort of, I almost want to say like community feeling or something like we do this together feeling. I was sitting on a plane. I was one of the first in, and I was sitting and people coming in, and there was a woman who fainted, and there's directly people on top, right? Like, oh, do you need some water? Where's the flight attendant? Is someone a doctor or whatever? Like, it's very, I don't know. When I saw that, I was like, I don't think I've really seen that in my country, for example. Like, I think it's just for me, that's something American. This disparity that you see and that's really in your face, I think that's the result of not following these American principles, basically. But when you really think about, this cooperation, freedom, sovereignty, property, all these values and principles are united in Bitcoin, basically. And I find it fascinating that currently the US is pretty far away from these principles in that sense.
Mm-hmm. I think Bitcoin will get us there.
I hope so. Yeah. I wanted to ask you also what's like the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself in this entire journey, finding, fading, and then eventually adopting Bitcoin.
Oh man, I know that I have a great answer for you off the top of my head on that one. Actually, I do. So I had a son as of about a year and a half ago. And I think that Bitcoin helped give me the optimism and faith for that too. Like I did mention that I was a pretty optimistic person beforehand. That's absolutely true. But giving me the low time preference and so much optimism for the future helped me to start a family too. And I didn't anticipate that being part of the journey. I didn't think that was going to happen. I knew I always wanted a kid somewhere on the future, but those two things are deeply intertwined for me. The financial like position that we're in matters so much for your family, and to know that he is going to have a future where he's not just having his hard-earned money stolen from him via inflation gives you so much hope for his life too. And a lot of millennials out there, I've heard this sentiment echoed a lot, that they don't want to bring a kid into the world. It seems like it's getting worse every year, and there's so much bad out there, but I don't feel that way. I feel like our family is immune from that because of this beautiful system.
Yeah. Would you say that adopting Bitcoin like lowers the uncertainty of your future? Like the uncertainty that everyone has, right? Like, because you don't know how much time you have, you don't know how much time you have to build a family, for example, or a career or whatever. But yeah, I kind of feel that once you adopt Bitcoin, the uncertainty is still there, of course, but it's really only about your time, the time you have in your life, not about, the bad reward that you get for spending your time and energy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really a really interesting topic. If you like lower this uncertainty about your future, you actually create time and space to think about, do I want a family, or have the time and space to actually have a family, or maybe change a career or start a company, or, whatever risk you want to add towards your future, basically.
It's so funny too, because people find Bitcoin to be so uncertain. They think it is. They think it's volatile, risky. All those words get thrown around, even though almost no one understands what they actually mean. But Bitcoin is not that. It's so certain. It allows you to have more predictable outcome in your future.
Yeah. I think that's why I sleep better, knowing that I have Bitcoin. But it's exactly that, right? It's exactly, I would describe myself as a pretty risk-averse person, but Bitcoin is the most certain thing I own. I really think that, people who sell it now or who gamble with it or do leverage or whatever, like, you don't know, you're still, occupied with the wrong thinking. Like, you don't know what you have. This is one of the most, well, maybe probably the most certain engineered thing in the world, basically. Mm-hmm. Just Bitcoin by itself is, I always say, like, engineered truth. Just for, the entire Bitcoin ledger is the truth for the Bitcoin network. That's the entire point.
And individuals and families don't have to invest so much time of their life about what stocks to invest, what strategies. Just like, you can simply save, and that can be the end of it. And You know that your relative value will increase over time.
Yeah. So another common theme I noticed amongst Bitcoiners is that a lot of people are into health-related topics. Is that something you recognize?
Yeah, hugely so. I in some ways went down the health rabbit hole before I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I used to be about 60 or 70 pounds overweight, more so than I am like currently. I weigh about like 225 pounds right now. And I used to be, it fluctuated a lot, but quite a bit heavier. And at the beginning of the conversation, I alluded to psychedelics. And the biggest thing I took away from that process actually was the terrible health choices that I was making. And I finally saw some of those toxic habits and completely changed them. And it might sound like a little bit of a reach to some people, But I think being forced to see bad habits you have, rethink the decisions you've made that have hurt your health, actually helped me to see Bitcoin more quickly. When I finally did, it made me start to question everything about the choices I was making, about the things I was putting into my body. And I think those ideas are just deeply, deeply intertwined.
Well, I think the mechanism of thinking is the same, right? Like once you, whether it's through health or your education or money or whatever, right? Like once you start to question, do I actually know why I'm doing what I'm doing? You know, if the answer is no, then that's already a pretty interesting result, right? But then if you go further, okay, but what was what do I think is true? What do I think is false? Who taught me that? Did I ever think about it, right? Did I ever reflect on it? And I think those are like the little steps you take to reflect totally on, whatever your point of view or your philosophy about something is, right? And then if the things you find are I want to say confrontational enough, right? There is no other. You cannot deny the what you find, right? So it's like you cannot go back to this old belief when you know that something else is true. And I think that's universal for people, that once you see a certain truth and you can substantiate that for yourself, then you would be lying to yourself if you would deny that. Like it would be very hard to live with, right? And I love that principle, that the fact that something gives you or makes you a bit anxious or makes you feel resistant, right? Like it is actually a signal that you have to go for it and go into it, right? And once you experience that one time on one topic or one behavior or whatever, right? Like then it becomes easier to also reflect on other things, right? So, your reflection on what you were putting in your mouth versus, what is money, are both pretty profound, I would say.
Once you find the way broadly, you see it in all things.
Yeah.
I've always loved that quote, and it's rang true with so many of these things. I think that writing, and specifically novel writing and fiction, is inherently truthy. You're constantly searching for truth, and you can't just impact the story in the way that you want it to be. You have to kind of just constantly be searching for what's true in the world, which is so much the case in Bitcoin and health, just so many other domains. Like this constant obsession with truth, I think, is required to be good at anything. And more than that, even, I think it's required to live a good life.
Yeah, it's funny. Like once you make a story, like when you write your book, you cannot lie anymore. Because if you lie, you have to change the whole thing. That's a fun example. Yeah.
And it kind of makes you, it's a deep kind of truth too. Like it's not just like this thing in the book is a lie or truthy. Also, like it has to be true to who you are, what you believe in. It has to be like a fundamental truth of the way the world works in order for your characters to feel real and the story to resonate with people properly.
Yeah. So what's like a spiky point of view you have on Bitcoin that not many people share with you?
Oh man, I'm sure I can think of a couple here. I'll pick one here. I think that a lot of people hate on privacy features. I see people ripping on coin joins and all those things and say that it's a terrible thing to do. And it's going to ruin your ability to cash out eventually. I think it's a useful tool, just like all these things that people can utilize if they want a little bit more spending privacy or whatever. I'm not saying people should even do it. If you don't know what it is or have no interest in it, don't do it. But the argument I heard very frequently, and I just got into a couple debates with people about actually recently on Twitter, was that you're never going to be able to spend these blacklisted UTXOs or CoinJoin. I think that's a little bit short-sighted, because one thing that I think that Bitcoin has taught us is that markets will always evolve. There will always be ways to spend these things. There's always a buyer to the other side, as long as you have Bitcoin, essentially. And I don't know, I feel like I have some slightly controversial opinions there. At least I found a lot of people that really hate on some of the privacy features out there. Not features necessarily, but tools used to increase privacy. I'm very curious how that all pans out as well. I think that's going to be kind of an incoming fight here, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of a lot of people that have identified as crypto anarchists, which I love those people. Don't get me wrong, but I just feel like there's a lot of that sentiment that's going to start coming to a head against some of the more Michael Saylor types in the world that purely want to think of this thing as a financial asset. Yeah. And I think Bitcoin's going to survive just fine, but there could be some tumultuous times in the intermediary period.
I agree with that. I also yesterday was in a Twitter conversation where I tweeted something about Andreas Antonopoulos, who's like a OG Bitcoin, and a guy who famously had like a Bitcoin presentation in like a room with 10 people. He perfectly understood it. He rebutted a lot of arguments, like critiques that we still hear today in a perfect way. Like his content is infinitely recyclable, basically, right? Like you're reusable. And then someone, because I said like maybe we should get a Bitcoiner on Joe Rogan, right? I think Saylor should do it. And then someone said no, Antonopoulos is the real OG. Like Saylor is like more a TradFi guy. But I also replied like I think Saylor is just like this the Bitcoin spokesperson for this cycle, yep. Right? And in this stage of Bitcoin, like I align with all the cypherpunk values and principles, but eventually, and we've seen that, and we talked about that in this episode, right? We cannot just get everyone onto Bitcoin with just those arguments. That's just not that many people. And because Bitcoin doesn't care, doesn't care who adopts it eventually, I think that, over the entire, let's say, when you look at Bitcoin in a total overview, like where it should go, like it should become a global store of value, right? And we shouldn't really care how it eventually gets there, because we cannot change anything about it. We cannot change who adopts it at a certain point. So I think just as what we talked about in the beginning, right? Like new people writing books like you, new people doing podcasts like me, new people that are like at the forefront of Bitcoin adoption. Yeah, now it's Michael Saylor. This Andreas Antonopoulos guy did the hardest part. He did the 0 to 1 part. He was standing in front of a room with 10 people. 10 people, but the video from that event has reached millions of people, right? Like he did the 0 to 1 part. He took the random idea from the internet, locked himself up for weeks. He shared in this podcast how he went like almost crazy studying this. And then he started synthesizing it and sharing it with people like that. That is legendary. Like the fact that you are so incentivized to do that and still do that today, with the videos that are reused, like he deserves the highest praise in that sense. But I think, it's just different cycles have different people. And we cannot just have maybe the cypherpunk reality will come later once we've duped all the finance bros in, getting into Bitcoin, and they get in because they're so greedy. But eventually they don't realize that this thing destroys their entire fiat money game. And I think that would be purely poetic if that happens.
I think something that people miss on this too is like Michael Saylor is making all of those crypto anarchists really rich. Like they're literally getting more power in the system the more Bitcoin adopts, right?
Yes, I agree.
He's improving their lives regardless of if he disagrees or if they disagree with what he's doing with the network, right?
Well, and that gives them more leverage to spread the cypherpunk movement, right? And have the liquidity or assets to actually make a dent, which just wasn't possible before. Like I think about Occupy Wall Street a lot, where I felt like that was a real movement, right? Like that was real, like really grassroots, real, and people slept in those tents. And then at one point, it was gone, because people had to get back to work, right? Or it was a rainy day or whatever. But yeah, if the cypherpunks have a lot of money, we can do a lot of stuff. So I agree with you there.
Yeah. If anybody listening has not read Andreas's Internet of Money, it's a book that's a compilation of a bunch of his talks. It's probably my most highest recommended Bitcoin book. It's fantastic. It's made digestible, and yeah, he was so wildly ahead of his time. I really appreciate the guy.
I agree. Great foresight. All right. I want to ask you the last question, and I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go?
I think Bitcoin is probably the most important idea presently in the world. But the reason I wrote my first book was because I thought there was this idea that is so important that you need to embrace the disadvantages and things that are part of you. I have Tourette syndrome, which is like a very like uncontrollable tics and things. Gotten much better at managing it as I've gotten older. But I used to just hate the way that my brain functioned. But slowly over time, via suppressing those tics, you kind of get stronger self-control, and it turned me into the person that I am today. And I've become so deeply grateful for it. And I think that you can't control what happens to you in life, right? You're given what you have. You have to make the most of that. And I think I see so many people using these disadvantages that they have, whether they be genetic, financial, socioeconomic, as a story that they tell themselves, that they use as an excuse for not having success or not having the things they want in the world. And I think you need to not do that. I think that is a terrible, terrible decision to make. You need to have gratitude for the life that you have. Try to embrace the things that are uniquely you and turn them into your advantage in the world.
Things happen for you, not to you, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome, man. Well, I love that message. Thanks so much for sharing. Thanks so much for this conversation. I wish you all the best finishing the book. And then, let me know when it's out, man. I'd be happy to read it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And more than that, thank you so much for making your show. There's so many of us out there who enjoy it.
Awesome, man. Thanks. Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for the next episode.